create a window that I can drag and let go as well. And I want to focus on RxJs and kind of did a little setup here so that we can move forward quickly. So we will look at this one later, and we will start with this observable. So this observable is already hooked up to one of the diffs. So what we're looking at is two diffs, an outer diff and an inner diff, and the outer diff is the one we are moving, and the inner diff is the one that determines the movement, so to say. But in reality, it will actually only listen to the initial mouse down, and from there on over, we will let the document handle it. But yeah, so we have this outer diff, and this obviously has the ability to be spaced, to be placed in absolute terms, and we do that with this notion of top and left and bottom and right and those things. But we'll focus on top and left because we are bringing it down to coordinates, and we are mapping it in the template to top and left, but that is not really important. What is most important is to see that that works. So if we add a 1 here, we can see that the X value, or the left one, moves over, and similarly if we take a Y of 0, it will go all the way there. So that is a good starting point. As I mentioned in some of my other videos as well, it's always good to sort of start with off, because it's simple and it can kind of bring you the basic notion. And I think with drag and drop, what is most important or most complex to understand is that it has some initial, there's an initial event needed to start the movement. But the beauty about RxJS is that we can kind of compose slowly into that idea. So we wouldn't start there, for example. So we'll start with off, and then a logical next step is to take this sort of synchronous stream and turn it into to sort of a more asynchronous idea of a stream. And RxJS actually comes in with built-in listeners, so we can use fromEvent, and we just have to pass it the document and then mouse move, right? So what this will do is, since we know we are mapping from X and Y, and we know that in mouse move it returns an object which actually has X and Y in it, we can already expect something to happen. So once we do that, we can see that we have sort of the basic idea here, right? The only problem is now that it just is always tied to the position of the mouse, and we don't want that. You know, we kind of want to subscribe to the position of the mouse at a certain moment in time of our own choosing. Okay, so this is very important. We want to subscribe to the mouse move, so we want to subscribe to this event at a certain moment in time, right? So how can we subscribe? Well, the way we can subscribe in RxJS is actually in several different ways. Currently we are subscribing to this event through this observable, and in the template we are using the the async pipe. So that's one way to subscribe. Another way to subscribe is by using a higher order operator, or so those would be things like exhaustMap or switchMap. It's actually like that, or concatmap. So for this video, it's not really important to understand the difference. The difference sometimes is subtle, and sometimes it's very important. I do really recommend to understand the difference, but In this specific case, it's not really important, and maybe we'll get to the point to explaining why it isn't important. But for now, just know that this is a way to subscribe to an observable. And that's kind of what we need, because we are already subscribed on the async, but we kind of want to transform that subscription into an inner subscription. We want to take the mouse moves, but only at a certain moment in time when we meet these operators, right? So let's move on to the next part, and that's to talk about this. So that's the start drag, and it's an event handler on the mouse down. So if I just take this back to off, and I'll give it the X and the Y again, we can look into that one. So this is kind of an, currently it's an event, but we kind of want to observe this event, because this is the starting point of what we want to do, right? I'm now clicking it here. I'm actually holding my mouse down, so to say, and then this would be a great starting point. So we can think about it in terms of its event, and we will most certainly look at that later on. But for now, it's best to look at it as a way to say, okay, this is a starting point. You know, this is something we want to subscribe to. We want to subscribe to whenever the moment comes that this happens, and whenever it happens again, and things like that, and sort of endlessly. But we are currently not interested in whatever object this is and whatever data this carries. So the way we can do that is by using a subject. So we can take that subject and we can actually trigger that one. And currently we are already pushing in the event, but we could as well just left it empty. Obviously, currently that would scream at us, because we gave it here the generic of a mouse event, so it expects something like that. So yeah, let's do that for now. But don't think about the value we're passing. Just think about it as a moment in time in which this this observable starts to emit anything. Okay, so it doesn't matter what at this point. It just matters that it starts doing anything. So if we tie these worlds together, what we get is that we basically want to say that whenever this happens, you know, this start movement, that's sort of the moment when we want to give it some value. Let's start relatively easy, kind of the off example of it, you know. So we'll return an object with the X of, let's say, 33 and Y of 70, you know, just for the sake of argument. So what's happening now is that we are already subscribed to this move window, but initially this start movement does not have a default value. You know, it's kind of I guess undefined or something like that. So there's no initial mapping to an X and Y position, you know, and maybe we could turn this into a behavior subject and solve that problem. But I find the subject to be a better choice here, because we can actually conceptually do that right here. So what we can say is that we want some starting with value, you know, so that would be the first value to come from that. So what we can say is that we want to start with, let's say, X of 0, Y of 0. Let's actually make it 2 and 2, just to give it a little bit of pleasantries. So there we are. So what are we looking at now? So what we're looking at now is we are listening to the mouse down. So that would be on this inner div. And as soon as that happens, at any given moment, we are mapping that to a hard-coded value. So there we are. See, so I just did it, and then it gets to that position. And that's an okay starting point, because now we can see that we are actually listening to that event. We are subscribing to it, so to say. But we are mapping to it in the pipe, but we are not, let's say, subscribing to the notion of movement as we saw it before, right? So we are not subscribing to the fromEvent observable that we saw before. So we would like to do that. Like we would like to say something like fromEvent here with the thing. But unfortunately, we cannot use map for that because map just simply takes a value that came from an observable before it and maps it to a new value, right? So currently we are just mapping whatever and always mapping it to this x and y value. So in order to do that, we have to use one of these higher order ones. And for now, I'll use exhaustMap, and maybe later I'll explain a little bit why I chose it. Although in this example, it doesn't really matter which one you choose. I think it's good to do exhaustMap. So let's take away this one actually. So we'll come back to the state where we have the fromEvent on the document, and then we'll take the mouse moves again, right? So now we replace this. So we'll still have the startWith, and we have not yet subscribed to the fromEvent because we are not entering the exhaustMap yet. That only happens with the start movement. So if we do that, now we are getting somewhere, right? So this is sort of a first good step. So we actually have some of it done, right? We have the ability to just do whatever we want, and then we'll start there and we get it. That's pretty good. Great. So yeah, we can do a couple of other things, and if you have been watching, you probably see some issues with this. But let's think about sort of, now that we have worked on the start notion, let's think about the end of this all, right? So what would be a good end? Well, what we basically want to do is we want to unsubscribe from this ID of the mouse movement. Yeah, we want to say, hey, we've subscribed to your movement, we've taken your movement, and we map them to the XY of the box. But at some point, we want to unsubscribe from that idea. You know, and what's the moment? It's the moment that the mouse is up. You know, when I release my mouse, I want it to stop, because that's the behavior of a window. So we really want to take that fromEvent, and we want to sort of conditionally stop at some point. So we can most certainly do that. So if we take a pipe within that inner observable, and we can say something like take until, right? And what take until does is it actually expects an observable, you know, and whenever that observable is sort of triggered, that's when the unsubscribe logic will happen, right? So yeah, if you think of any observable, there's potentially a time aspect to it as to when that would happen, or there's maybe a certain behavior when that happens. That's when you want it to stop. So we could use a timer, and then it would stop at a certain time, but obviously that wouldn't make sense here. So what we are doing is we're actually going again to think about that fromEvent. You know, we again want to look at the document and say, hey, whenever your mouse is up, we want this thing to stop. So we'll do that. And actually, I shouldn't have been passing the callback here. I should just do the observable right away. Let's see. So that looks pretty good. So now I'm having my mouse down, I can move around, and then as soon as I let go, I can sort of go back to that initial state. You know, we're still subscribed to the subject. So whenever that happens, we are going back into the exhaustMap. The exhaustMap again subscribes to the first event, and then it takes it until the second event. So that works perfect, you know, and the startWith is only triggered once, so it gets skipped every time ever since. So everything is sort of happy and good. So there's one kind of optimization we can do. So if you look at it, if I start my journey all the way in the top right of this sort of inner diff, I'm still sort of transported to the top left. And the reason why that is because we are currently looking at it from the perspective of the mouse move, right? So what you could be thinking is that the mouse is sort of, you know, shifting over to the left, but that's not actually what's happening. What's happening is that the box is actually shifting to wherever the mouse is, right? And that's not what we want. We don't want the box to shift over to where the mouse is. So it will happen because the mouse is in the end the event. You know, this is what we're subscribing to, the mouse. The box is sort of out of the equation at this point. But we can sort of account for that, right? We can sort of say like, hey, if I go all the way here, I want you to count the pixels from where I started and offset it, okay? And similarly, I want to do that on the much smaller Y problem here, right? So if I zoom in, you can see that there's, of course, also that happening. So you can see it always sort of goes to that point. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, the mouse down, as soon as we enter, that's sort of where the first twitch started, has this object, right? So we have this object. And we do actually, within that object, have this idea of an offset X and an offset Y. And basically what this does is it counts the amount of pixels from the initial X and Y, right? So if we look at an example of that, let's sort of start here. Let's do all the way there and open it up. We can see that we have an offset X of 3 and an offset Y of 2. And that seems to make sense because we were kind of all the way there. So let's do that again, move it all over here, so kind of to show the purpose. And then let's go there. Okay, so now we went all the way there, right? So we expect something more dramatic than that. So there we are. So we can see that now we have an offset X, so that would be this one, of 197 and an offset Y of 12. So that seems to make sense, right? If you think about it, it's sort of like X, Y. So basically what we want to do is we want to take those values and we want to subtract them from whatever the XY value is that we get when we start dragging, right? We want to take that offset and sort of offset it, basically. So how we do that is that we have this observable here, and currently we are not looking at whatever that observable gives us in terms of value. We're just using it as a starting point, but we can use it as sort of something like that. So we can use destructuring, and we can look for those two things. So we have offset X and we have offset Y right there. So then what we want to do is we want to return an object of X and Y, right? So that makes sense. And specifically, we want to not hard code it like I did now. We want to take whatever came from that mouse move, right? So there's a lot in there, and definitely also X and Y. But we do have, let's see, client, I think. Is it aware? Oh, wait, maybe it's not aware that it's a mouse move. So let's give it the one over there. Yeah, so now so we have client X and client Y, and there are several ones that work. We actually do also have X and Y like here. Yeah, so let's take those because we have sort of been implicitly using those the whole time. Yeah, so basically what we have to do is take the offset X there and do that. similarly for the y, we do y minus the offset y. And now you can see that it works as an offset. So the mouse is still the one we're subscribing to. It's just that the box shifts over as soon as we do, right? As soon as we do, it shifts over. Maybe we can put in a little delay here. You can see that a little bit happening. So it's basically kind of following him. So yeah, that's a way in RxJS to tie mouse moves to a box. It's easy to scale, and it's important to understand all these steps and yeah, have fun trying it yourself. Maybe you can look for different ways. Maybe you can look for optimizations. But this is, yeah, this is a way to do it. Thank you.